to episode 484 of Cinematary. I am your host, Zach Dennis, and I am here solo for part one. In part one, I'm gonna gab for a little bit. We have a longer part two this week. In part two, we're gonna be concluding our journalism and film series. We're gonna be talking about 2015 Spotlight, and in that part, I'm joined by three journalists from the Charlotte Observer, where I work, who are all different beats, as well as one former journalist and just kind of film fan. Really excited for y'all to hear that discussion. It's a little bit over an hour, so I don't want to talk too long here in the first part of the podcast. I'm gonna save all the goodies for that. And also, I really haven't seen any movies, I'll be honest. This is the first episode we're doing since we got back from TIFF. And I don't know, I can't speak for the other people on the podcast, but I don't know. I go to TIFF, and then afterwards it's like I take like not a month, but like 2 or 3 weeks off from like watching movies. And you're watching, like this year I think I watched 12 features and then 8 short films, and you're watching that all in the span of like a long weekend. And then you get home and you're like, I don't really want to watch movies. I get much more into like catching up on TV. I get much more into like playing some video games. And just kind of, I need to take like a break after just like, just very focused attention to movies, over the next few days. And there really hadn't been anything too much that I've like wanted to see. I think I'm going to try to go see Megalopolis, this coming up weekend. But other than that, like, you know, I'm not going to be pushing people over to see Transformers 1. I'm not all that, like, I'm not going to be pushing people over to see The Wild Robot. No shade to those movies, but I'm just saying, you know, that's not something that I'm necessarily, looking to go see. I did see, here in Charlotte, the Charlotte Film Festival kicked off, on Tuesday, the Tuesday of this episode dropping. And I saw this documentary about Roberto Clemente, called Clemente. It was good. It's one of those things where, you know, you're kind of like, how are you going to cover this? Documentaries, I feel like, are kind of tough for me because you want to, like, to me, it's kind of tough to assess. It, you know, becomes a little bit less of like, oh, the cinematography here, or oh, the script here. It's kind of like you're just telling the story, and you're like, is this engaging to me or not? And like, I have a tough time rating documentaries because it's like, yeah, I had a good time with it. I have nothing else to say. You know, you can't sit there and kind of talk about, oh, well, the mise en scène here. Oh, the lines of dialogue here. It's kind of just like, how did they portray the story? Clemente does a good job of portraying his story. For those unfamiliar, Roberto Clemente was a outfielder for the Pittsburgh Pirates in the late 50s through the 60s and into the early 70s. He's from Puerto Rico. He was the first Latin American baseball player to win a National League MVP, to win a World Series MVP, and to be inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame. And it's not much of a spoiler, but a spoiler alert: he died tragically on December 31st, 1972, when he was flying on a plane going to Nicaragua to deliver humanitarian aid to the Nicaraguan people after an earthquake leveled this city there, and the plane crashed as he was flying there into the ocean and killed him. He was I want to say around getting close to 40 years old. He had 3 kids and a wife back in Puerto Rico. He was literally like a god in Puerto Rico. And the thing that's really cool about him is, one, he's an incredibly talented baseball player. 3,000 hits, 2 World Series championships, the accolades that I mentioned before. He won Gold Gloves pretty much every year throughout the 60s. But also was just it's just an incredible person. The thing I like about the documentary, because you cover his home life and growing up in Puerto Rico and kind of who he was prior to becoming the illustrious outfielder for the Pittsburgh Pirates. But what I really liked about this documentary, because it covers Puerto Rico, it covers Pittsburgh, it covers the 2 World Series that he wins. But what really stood out to me is just the breadth of people that they talked to. And one of the cool things that in terms of people they talked to was they talked to like Pittsburgh Pirates fans. And those fans were interesting because these are people who had run-ins with Roberto Clemente and talk a little bit about that experience with him. You have one fan, and she was like, yeah, I remember where it's after a game, and he's signing autographs for all these kids, and he's been signing autographs for so long that the bus to the airport to take them to the airport to fly them out for their next series has already left, and so he's like, oh shoot, and so she goes, oh well, we can take you. And Roberto Clemente gets in the car with her and her dad, and they drive her to the airport. And he's like asking her questions. He's talking to her the entire time. He's asking her what she wants to be, etc. And they get to the airport, and he gives he like writes down his number and is like, yeah, call me Collect. And she's like, yeah, we from that moment on, like we have this like long-standing relationship with the Clemente family because of that moment. And you have another fan, and he's talking about when he was a kid. He's outside. He's throwing a rubber ball against the wall, and this car drives up, and Roberto Clemente gets out of it and is like, hey, like, let's see what you got, kid. And is like playing catch with this, he's probably like 8 or 9 at this point. And his parents like see it and invite him in, and he like has dinner with Roberto Clemente. He's the star of the Pittsburgh Pirates. And Roberto Clemente is incredibly nice and is like eating dinner there at their table. And it just, I mean, he's somebody who was always giving back. He was doing like free baseball camps in Puerto Rico and training, and working with children and things like that. And so this was a good documentary. I think, I talked a little bit about like, how do you grade it? I don't know. Like, I don't know how you would, it's really, it's well done. It's kind of tough. Like, just to get into like a side tangent. You see documentaries specifically, like you see these documentaries that pop up on like Netflix. I'll give you an example. We had this series that came out in the newspaper a couple weeks ago, and like we had a little teaser trailer for it to kind of just like lead people in and kind of like, hey, this is what this series is going to be about. And somebody commented on our Instagram page, was just like, need the Netflix documentary about this. And we were making one, so we're like, no, we have a documentary for you. We don't need Netflix. But I feel like that's it's kind of how a lot of people feel, is like they want like Netflix, and probably before that like HBO. Like they're all about documentaries, and it's kind of tough to assess which ones are good and which ones are not. At least in my opinion, because it's kind of like if you are into the topic, that's probably pretty good. But yeah, I'm thinking about like documentaries that I've liked in the last few years. I think one that always stands out to me is Feels Good Man, about the creator of Pepe the Frog and like his journey with creating this character that he just wanted to make to like bring good into the world, and he got co-opted by the alt-right as Pepe the Frog became this figure of the alt-right, and like how he like kind of had to contend with that, and how he was like attacked for that, even though he's like, yeah, like I didn't make this character for alt-right people. It was just kind of one of those things where content on the internet or something on the internet was co-opted by this group. And that's a documentary that's kind of stuck with me. A documentary that I don't think was particular. I don't know, like I guess. Again, this is where it's troubling, but like it's one that I thought of is this documentary that came out on HBO Max, a couple of years ago, about parasocial relationships, and but specifically parasocial relationships with people who are on Second Life, the computer game, and like how you never see the people in reality. They're interviewed through Second Life, and you're seeing like these avatars in Second Life, and like how they're having these like these vast experiences, and like there's people who are like dating and like are like super tight with friends, and it's all like it's just kind of it's strange because it's all on this computer program, but at the same time it's kind of nice. Like it's people have found like their community. And I say all this because it's, I don't know, with me documentaries are kind of tough to assess. It's kind of like at the end of it, did I really feel like it said something, or did it not? And I feel like Clemente says something. I feel like it says something that's a little bit new. I mean, there's countless books that you can read about him. There's a lot of stuff to see, but he also, and they talk about it in the doc, but like he's a player who often gets overlooked. You know, he's not Ted Williams, he's not Willie Mays, he's not Mickey Mantle, he's not Babe Ruth. Like he doesn't have like this. He's not. I would say like in the top 10 of like these mythical baseball names that you would think of, but he also was somebody who not only was an incredible baseball player on par with all those people, but also just this just remarkable human. And I think it captures that. And so I think it's a good documentary in that realm. But yeah. Outside of that, I really haven't watched anything. I'll be honest. I've been watching some TV. I've been playing some games. But I really haven't jumped back on the movies as much. And I'm hoping to do that pretty soon. But I'm not going to talk too much longer. I don't really have anything else to say. I'm glad we got to do this journalism series. It was really fun to explore. And I think this is a perfect cap to that as we talk. We really get into the weeds. I think this conversation is great because we get really in the weeds on how each of them, what Spotlight means to them, but also like how it reflects and makes them think and allows them to reflect on their career path. And I think it's one of those things where it's the magic of movies in terms of like stuff that is the movies that are meaningful to you, and for the reason why like rewatching movies is fantastic, because it's like, yeah, they, you know, you every time you rewatch a movie, you know, especially if you go years without seeing it, like something different, especially if it's a movie that you love or a movie that's just really good, something new stands out to you every time, and it's just, like exploring that each time is so amazing. I don't understand people who just watch a movie once and are like, yeah, I've seen it, I'm good. I like the exploration part, and I think we get into a lot of that in this discussion. So I'm going to step away. We're going to take a quick break, and then after that, we will be talking Spotlight after this. And this is part 2 of episode 484 of Cinematary. In this part, we will be concluding our journalism and film series with 2015's Spotlight. And I am joined by 3 journalists.
And a former journalist.
And a former journalist, and we'll give him film scholar.
Woo! Okay, let's go, Ryan.
I'm honored.
Yeah. But yeah, so we just watched Spotlight. I'm curious. We have a couple of people who just saw this for the first time. We have a couple of folks who watch it yearly. But I'm going to just go around. We're going to skip. I usually do a little bit of a fact sheet. We're going to skip that this week and just kind of jump into the conversation. Let's do it. Let's do it. I'm going to start with somebody and just introduce yourself a little bit. And then let's start with, what about this movie kind of speaks to you as a journalist? I'm going to start right with you, Alex.
Okay, cool. What's up, everyone? I'm Alex Zetlow, I guess, and I write for the Charlotte Observer. I write about sports for the Charlotte Observer. I have wanted to be a journalist my entire life. And I pictured journalism, I don't know about y'all, I pictured journalism at the Boston Globe in that newsroom where there were like 4 different stories, where the newspaper machine was just running all day, where like you could like feel the press, you know what I'm saying? And people wore shirts and ties, but like they didn't look good doing it, you know what I'm saying? Like they were ink stained, and they had.
You think Mark Ruffalo looks good?
No, he looks great. I mean, they have the bad haircuts, you know what I'm saying? They rolled up their sleeves so they can show a little bit of their forearms. They just look like they look like homeless important people, you know what I'm saying? And that is what I thought journalism was.
That particular part, to be fair, is kind of accurate.
I will say, and this was in 2001, we're living in a very different world in 2024. Like literally we giggled at the end of the film when they said, hey, yeah, this is a big deal. We'll put a URL at the end of the story. And like they had to like explain what that was. But like that is what I thought it was. I'm such a journalism geek that when we had senior week in high school and they said, like be who you want to like dress for your career, I literally dressed like one of the unnamed characters in Spotlight, like the dude with the mustache. I'm not even joking, bro. I had a burgundy shirt on. I had a tie that's too short for me. Anyway, everything about Spotlight is what I thought journalism was. And I thought what journalism is. I was like, oh, I want to be an investigative reporter that spends years on stories. In 2024, we don't have that luxury. I've written 35 stories in the month of September, and we're 25 days into it. And that's the life of a daily 24/7 news outlet that we are right now. We're not going to get into the state of journalism. I hope not. But like watching a film like this takes me back to like who Alex was when he first wanted to be a journalist. Everything about it was remarkable. There's so much reading in it. I don't want to talk too much, but there's so much reading in it. And I was just like, damn, like, how do they make reading look so thrilling? Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? Like they like literally put a ruler to all this shit. And I was just like, oh my God, I love it. So anyway, that's what initially caught me about Spotlight. And then the rest of it, the cinematography, the music, all of it kind of came later as I became more interested in like the art form of it.
Yeah.
But I'd love to hear what y'all had. Like,
when was the first time you saw it?
Oh gosh. Probably right around the time, probably like 2016. 2015 that's when it came out, right? I graduated high school in 2015, so like I knew it was a big deal around then. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's around then.
Right.
I'm Ryan Wilcox. I'm a former journalist, no longer a journalist.
Still a writer though.
Still a writer. I sold out. I'm a filmmaker, film lover. I think I watched this movie probably 2018 or 19. I want to say a couple years ago. Loved it like you guys do. I think this is a great film, up there with, All the President's Men and Zodiac. I would say is another newspaper movie, journalism movie. I think it's an amazing movie. We were laughing about Mark Ruffalo a little bit. I think it's an amazing performance there as well. But yeah, I love this movie. I think it's a great movie.
Yeah. My name is Julia Coyne. I'm also a reporter at the Charlotte Observer. I do courts and public safety now.
She's literally Mark Ruffalo.
Literally, that's what I try to be. He is on my bathroom mirror. That's a joke. I think I first watched this movie sometime in 2015, maybe 2016. I have a very vivid memory of watching it at the first journalism camp that I ever went to. I went to like 3 or 4 in high school. I was a journalism nerd to my core. And I remember we all watched it in this huge room. I think I'd watched it with my parents like a year before. And there were some people there. I was a freshman in high school at this point. And there were people there who had not seen it at all. I was like, you haven't seen Spotlight? Oh my gosh, you'll love it. And, like, was terrible acoustics. Right. And since then, I think I probably watch it every year. No, I've never gone more than 2 years without watching it. I kind of lean
a little bit of a juice up for journalism,
Oh, yeah. I was ready for my team meeting.
Do you watch it to recenter yourself in journalism? Yeah,
very much so.
Hell yeah,
very much so.
Rebecca, I'm curious to hear your thoughts, especially because this was the first time you'd seen it.
Yeah. So I'm Rebecca Noel. I also work for the Charlotte Observer. I cover education.
Let's go.
This was my first time seeing a movie. I loved it. It was great. I do feel recentered. Like we were saying, I'm like, hell yeah, my job's cool. So I don't know. Yeah, it really fired me up that way. But it's interesting because like I didn't come at it from the same perspective. Like y'all knew you wanted to be journalists and like really dreamed about it and kind of envisioned that. And I kind of like found my way into journalism later. So it's not like I grew up like watching journalism movies being like, that's what I want to do. I always thought it was really cool. But it's interesting watching it like having found my way into journalism now.
What did you want to do?
I initially wanted to get a PhD in psychology, and I wanted to be a therapist.
Oh, fascinating.
So,
great therapist.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. But that's what I wanted to do. So I did, like halfway through college, I was like, nah, this is not what I want to do. And I kind of like regrouped, and I was like, I really like writing. I think I had kind of convinced myself side tangent. I had kind of convinced myself, this is now the Rebecca Noel podcast. I had convinced myself that like I like writing and I'm good at it, but like I can't get paid to do like no, you know, I was like I can't do that for a living. I have to like figure out something else. And then eventually I was like, no, like somebody's got to do it.
Right.
Right. So.
What about you, Zach?
The first time I had seen this was when it came out. It won Best Picture, which was kind of a shock, just because, not because it's a bad movie, but it's a movie that it's not very showy. We'll talk about it in a second. Just the way that they film it. It's a good recentering thing. The series we watched, we started with All the President's Men, which I think is the most direct correlation with this. And it's interesting that y'all had this had an impact on you, because when we talked about All the President's Men, we talked a little bit about after the Watergate scandal, those stories in the Post, but also All the President's Men, where you have two journalists who are played by Robert Redford, like at the peak of his hotness.
Yep.
And Dustin Hoffman, like it seems like the coolest job of all time.
Yeah.
And you had this rush of people who were like, I want to be journalists because I watched All the President's Men. I want to be like Dustin Hoffman, or I want to be like Robert Redford. And so it's interesting on that side of things that this movie does the same thing for y'all, which is cool. It's kind of like you need one of those every once in a while to kind of like rejuice the passion.
Well, I will say that, I mean, it was kind of ingrained in my DNA. Like I knew the writers for the News and Observer already. You know what I'm saying? I knew that I went to a journalism camp as well. I didn't think that anyone ever did something so nerdy. So I appreciate that, Julia. She went to 3 of them. I was crazy. I'm literally going to a wedding this weekend with one of my best friends in this world, who I initially met at a UNC sports journalism camp. You really can't write this shit. But
they should bring back journalism camps.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. But so that was kind of already ingrained in my DNA. I already kind of saw journalists as superstars, but this reinforced the point. I was like, oh my God, you can be cool, you can write for a living, and you can change the world. Like, what else do you need?
And that's what's it. So this movie is interesting. It's similar in All the President's Men, where it's all about process. It's not, this one, very similar to that movie. It doesn't cover the scope of the whole story, because this is just the end of this movie is just the first story. Mm-hmm. And they go, as it says at the end of the movie, there's 600 other
more
stories,
Yeah.
And so, but it's also, and this is the kind of trouble with a lot of journalism movies, is journalism is super cool, but it's also incredibly boring.
It's wildly boring
to watch.
Oh, yeah.
It's a lot of, they show it in the movie. You're like leafing through the books, and you're like circling names, and then you're pulling that out and making spreadsheets. You're chasing down sources to get a quote, and they're not going to want to talk to you. They're shutting doors in your face. It's like kind of pedaling away at writing. It's, finding little slivers of some news, and then having to kind of just continue to claw, and then stuff will fall down. In y'all's opinion, what works about this movie where it's like, this is a very boring process, but how can we make it engaging for like a movie?
I think, because I kind of thought about this a little bit while watching the movie. I was like, wow, like journalism is so cool. And I'm like, well, it's because they can like make a montage of like going through court documents, right? Whereas like in real time, you might spend several days doing that.
They're literally like, 6 weeks later.
Right, exactly. Like you can fast forward, you can, spend more time on the conversations where you're having like a really kind of illuminating conversation with somebody, or like you're kind of making like a breakthrough, rather than like, they kind of sped through like when the door got slammed in their face, right? Like, so you don't have to like spend as much time on the stuff that isn't as sort of immediately interesting. And I think that's part of the reason that it like appeals to us as like journalists, and we're like, wow, like journalism is so cool, because like the stuff that they show is like, it is part of the job, and it's why we got into the job, but it's not all the time.
It's the cool parts.
Right. It's the cool parts of the job. It's not the parts of the job where you're like going through documents for days on end. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Well, I think people like to see in movies, you like to see people who are competent and are good at their job, no matter what it is. So like process can be boring, but it can be really exciting when you see like, if you see a movie about an assassin who's a great killer, and all his methodology it's the same thing in a movie like this. The same thing in a movie about a guy flipping burgers. It's just like you like to see someone who's good at what they do. And I think that's really cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
The thing, I'm not sure if this exactly answers your question, Zach, but one thing I thought was really powerful about journalism. So we know this as journalists, and obviously as former journalists, whatever, or people who are near journalists who hear us bitch about this all the time. Like the professional lives and our personal lives seep together and bleed together in an unmistakable way all the time. Like, who are we close friends with? Other people who get us, you know what I'm saying? And so, like, I thought this movie did I'm getting goosebumps thinking about this. They did such a masterful job of just like subtly showing, oh, Rachel McAdams is picking up the phone at her home and her husband's like, tough day at work. She's having a tough time shoving the dishes back. We see Mark Ruffalo's character in an undecorated apartment and him picking up the phone and drinking beer and literally like boiling fucking hot dogs. I really shouldn't be cussing this much, but I just get so fired up. He's boiling hot dogs and just like his friends are banging at the door at 9 p.m. or 10 p.m. or whatever it is because they know that he's awake, because they know that he's working. You got a guy with a family who is like plastering stuff on his fridge that's seeping into work. You just like see this mesh of personal and professional lives, and I was just like, man, that's my life. I'm watching this movie. I'm literally doing this podcast, and I get a text from a source just now. Like our group message is talking about, oh, Alex, your work is showing up on fantasy football. That's a humble brag type shit, but like,
check out Jonathan Mingo.
But but that's what happens. Like that is our work. This isn't our work. These are our lives. And I know it's unhealthy to say, you know, but like I think Spotlight does a really masterful job of capturing that.
Yeah, I think especially with something like journalism, like we get into it, Lord knows it's not for the paycheck, heyo, but we get into it for like, because we care and because we're invested and because it's stuff that matters. And so like, if you get into it because it means something to you, it's not like you can just leave at the end of the day and unplug and that's over. You know what I mean? So I feel like it's like, because of that, it's a part of who you are. So it is going to like bleed into it.
The guy said, I haven't slept in months.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like, and while they're doing all that work of just checking off people, they're looking through all these books, like that took a long time. But if I was on that case or whatever it may be, I would be like, I don't think I can rest until I find every name, until I go through every name. I mean, it's just remarkable. Julia, I mean, does that resonate with you, the bleeding in professional?
Yeah, I made a note that I think that that's like a whole subsect of the craft of this movie is the ways that they show, as you said, she's sitting in her home and picking up the phone, talking about things. I noted the hot dogs as well.
Julia's our hot dog aficionado, for what it's worth.
And I think that was something that really resonated with me this time around more than previously, because I think the last time I watched it was at the end of college. So there were so many things that just hit more for me this watch.
Yeah, did anything for at least for y'all three who have seen it before, did anything stand out this time that you hadn't kind of, maybe you remember, but like you were like, oh damn, that really hits differently this time?
Yeah, well, just to add one more thing to what you guys were just talking about. I mean, I think like a lesser version of this movie has a scene with Mark Ruffalo's wife, and he comes and she's like, when are you going to finish this? This is tearing our marriage apart, all this stuff. And you get stuff of them at home, but it's mostly just them working. You know, you have the moment with Rachel McAdams' husband, and just like, oh, it's Mike again. It's Mark Ruffalo again. And then they just go outside and have their conversation. Yeah. So it's never about like mining the melodrama of their other relationships. It's just about the relationships of these people at work, and no one really outside of that.
Yeah, it's very narrow.
Yeah,
in what it's looking at.
Yeah, and Nana's reading the story, and she's just like, I don't know her name. Rachel, can you give me a glass of water? Sasha. Yeah. Hell yeah. Yeah. But Zach, to answer your initial question about what struck me, fourth or fifth time I've watched this film, I hadn't seen it in a couple of years, so a lot of things struck me. Probably the biggest thing. Well, this isn't the biggest thing. One thing that struck me was everyone asked every character where they're from. Mm-hmm. They were always just like, oh, so what part of Boston are you from? East Boston. Oh, you don't sound like it. They're like they hammer home, I think, a little unsubtly at the beginning, like, oh, Boston's a small town, but really a big city, but also a small town, and everyone knows each other, but also, and we all have each other's backs type of thing. And like, that is effective to a point, but at a certain point, as a viewer, I don't know how y'all felt. I was like, all right, we get it. You know what I'm saying? But then, like, they do so beautifully, like, throughout the movie. Oh, where are you from? Like, so the Sasha, one of the victims is talking to her, and he's like, oh, so are you from Boston? She's like, no, but she gets immediately offended. No, but my parents are from Southie, or my grandparents are from Southie, or whatever.
You prove yourself.
She needs to prove herself because, and I get it. If you're handling a delicate story at the Charlotte Observer, they're going to be like, where are you from? And I'm sure, Rebecca, you've had to say, I'm from Houston, but, or Julia, I'm sure you've had to say, I'm from Florida, but. Like, I even say, yeah, I didn't grow up in Charlotte, but I've been here for 5 years in North Carolina. I grew up in Raleigh. North Carolina's my home. I care about this state, blah, blah. I don't know why, because maybe it's because journalism is such a profession where, like, they need to see themselves in you to trust you. But, like, the geography of the whole thing, I, like, very much resonate with that. I was like, I get that.
Yeah.
I get it in my own job.
Yeah. And I think, well, especially with local journalism, it's like, it's so grounded in place and where you are. Like, that's the big difference between the Charlotte Observer and like national news is like, it's in Charlotte. And so the people that are here want to know that you like understand Charlotte and can like represent it to them. Cause like, it's, you know, if not, they could just get national news anywhere, you know?
100%.
Yeah, and the movie's about like local institutions. It's about the Boston Globe and the Catholic Church in Boston and how they, you know, sort of the people within those institutions and how they interact with each other and how they affect each other and the rest of, you know, the rest of the city and stuff like that. But yeah, I think it's just a movie about institutions and how they, you know, the interplay between those two.
Mm. Julia, any other things on like 20th watch that you learned?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I had forgotten about the intro to the movie.
Oh, yeah.
The police station. I don't know why, but that really stood out to me this watch. Specifically, like the mention of the assistant district attorney. I don't even know that I understood exactly what an assistant district attorney was when I watched this movie the first few times. Whereas now I talk to them weekly, and so that like immediately got me riled up. When I was like, the assistant district attorney is saying that they need to keep this under wraps. Are you kidding me? And then I kept that energy throughout the entire watch this time around.
Yeah.
I also, for the first time, kind of took note of it was just kind of the reality, I think, of newsrooms in 2000, 2001.
100%.
But it's very much like a dude's room. And I took note of
a white dude's room.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I took note of the whole series and the whole reason Spotlight was on this story or back on this story was because a woman wrote a column about the lawsuits. And I thought that was really interesting too, because I believe that she was the only woman in that like editors big conference in the beginning where the Ben is asking questions. And then I've always really resonated with Sasha and her reporting style, I guess, because I feel like that's also very juxtaposed with kind of like the aggressiveness that the other guys have of, you know, how he's interacting with the lawyer, which he's like, oh, I like characters, I'll take him.
Right.
I feel like he's doing a great job, but I never really took note of that before.
How you watch them, this can be a question for everybody, they're pretty good at like mimicking like what an interview is like. We talked about it a little bit, but like the interplay that you have with the source you're talking to. Is the scenes when they're interacting specifically with like lawyers, does that resonate a little bit more where you've had to interact with lawyers and like you're hitting that wall of, you know, I can't tell you that.
Yeah, very much so. Even in the beginning where Mark Ruffalo's character, I think it's funny that we can't remember the character's names.
Well, I think it's fair to say that the acting was so amazing that we just remember the actors. I think that's a fair thing to say.
fair.
Anyway,
but when he's first talking to the main lawyer,
Mhm.
and she's like, "Well, I shouldn't be talking to you anyway," and
Mhm.
just kind of shuts down.
He just burrows his way
He
everywhere.
really
He's a little
throws his
mole.
way.
He's hunched over all the time. He's
Yeah.
just nagging people.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
He always hides his notepad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's very like. There's a moment where Stanley Tucci tells him, "Don't record this in any form."
Mhm.
First, he tells him, "Don't record this," and he's writing in the notes, and he's like, "Don't record it." So, and then he puts his notebook away. So he's always like respectful of
Yes.
people's boundaries,
Yeah.
which I think the whole, everyone's like that. Richard McAdams, same thing. But yeah, how does that work for you guys? If when you're like, what's the worst thing that someone's getting doors slammed in your face or something like that? Like, how do you take that?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's easy, and I understand whether it's lawyers or people or anyone in between. But I understand why you would be apprehensive to talk to a random person about.
Yeah.
For the lawyer, it's like this is his life right now. He's talking to victims, children at the end of the movie. He's entrenched in 80 cases, is it, that he's juggling, and so it's understandable that they wouldn't just want to go ahead and talk to this person who's storming in. And so you have to balance being assertive and no, this is why you should trust me, but also personable and like, well, this is who I am, and this is why you should trust me. And it's a real balancing act, one that they don't really teach you in journalism.
Well, because you have to build a lot of trust very, very quickly,
Yes.
but then also keep enough of like kind of a boundary that it's a tough thing to do.
yeah, you have to be brash and arrogant enough to be that Walter Robinson character, whoever Michael Keaton played, and be like, no, you're going to give me those names. And then when McLeish says, I gave you those names 5 years ago, you have to be like, oh shit, I'm sorry, or whatever
He's
happened.
gonna eat it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess in that perspective, but you have to be brash and arrogant and kind of a little slithery enough to get into people's view. And then once you're in their view, you got to take advantage of it.
But the thing it also shows is you also have to. It can't just all be transactional. Is you think about Mark Ruffalo's character, Mike. He's on the phone with sources, and they're just like shooting the shit. He's talking about the case with the author who Richard Jenkins voices, but he's also just kind of like talking about when he's talking about, well, do you still like go to mass? That's technically a question for this, but he's also just kind of shooting the shit with them. The same thing with like Stanley Tucci. He's at the diner, and they're just kind of. They're talking about, the cases to a degree, but he's also just kind of talking about like, well, you don't sound like you're from East Boston. You seem like a little bit of an outsider kind of thing. And so like, that's part of it also. It can't just all be like, I need you to give me this. It has to also be like, you have to be a human as well.
And even when he's getting information, it's not always a question that gets him. Like sometimes he's just like someone's talking and they're talking about, oh, I had to do this and that. And Mark Ruffalo goes, oh, that sounds tough. And then they keep talking. It's just a conversation. It's not like, set up for the next question, here we go. And then reason number 8 million why I'm not in journalism, because I couldn't keep it. It's just like point A to point B questions, but it's like, no, just.
Well, it's the thing you got to learn where you can't just like go in and be like, tell me what I need to know. You're like, they're not going to tell you anything. You have to ease your way in. You have to ask a bunch of questions that you're not even going to use that like sets them up. And then, because then once you get comfortable, then you can ask the question that you need.
One thing that was very real about this film and very real about the industry that drove me crazy, and y'all heard many outbursts about how editors comport themselves and stuff like this in this film from me. But one thing that drove me nuts was the eccentric lawyer, Garabedian. He goes, oh, the Phoenix wrote a story on this. It's really good. You should read it. And then Ruffalo's Mike goes, no one reads the Phoenix. People read us. We can make an impact. And I think, and perhaps that has changed a little bit in the internet era, and when things are on the record, things are out and stuff like this. But in many ways, I think one of the biggest frustrations of our job is like, okay, yeah, everyone has access. Everyone has a voice. That's great. But when society is so fragmented, when we don't have an agreed upon source of truth and trust, how can impact happen? And it's obviously to a different extent now. I think it's to a more difficult extent now because not everyone is over the kitchen table reading a newspaper anymore in their communities. But I still felt that a little bit when Mike said, no one reads Phoenix. In my opinion, he's basically saying and he's allowed to show his might in this way, but he's basically like, dude, we're the Boston Globe. You tell us and we can make shit happen. These tiny ass papers who might have very talented journalists, they can't get the shit done like we can. And I don't know about y'all. I worked at the Daily Tar Heel, obviously a very powerful student newspaper, but it's still a student newspaper. And then I worked for the Rock Hill Herald, which is used to be it still could be, but it used to be a very powerful local newspaper that kind of got eaten up by the internet and kind of lost its impact for a variety of different reasons. And I would work my ass off. I would have so many nights where I'd lean back in my chair and I'd have such greasy hair and I'd be like, I just need to do this. I just need to put together a sports section that matters to those kids, that matters to these parents, that matters to this community. And people didn't care until it hit something bigger or went to the Charlotte Observer or something like that. And that drove me insane, guys. That, like, I used to be local journalism, blah, 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 and I still am that way. But that, like, I don't know about y'all. Maybe I'm just like working through some shit right now. But that hurts. That hurts when people discredited my fucking work at a smaller newspaper. And when Mike said that shit, I don't know about y'all, but I was like, okay, bro, we get it. You're a big deal. But also, you can go fuck yourself. Because not actually Mike, but the character Mike. Obviously, Mike, you do a great job. But like, when I heard that, I was like, dude, the Phoenix wrote this story. They wrote it. I hate to have my Mark Ruffalo moment, but they wrote it before the Globe. And guess what? Who gets a fucking movie made about it? The Boston Globe. Anyway, that's one thing that drove me.
So you don't like this movie?
No, I love it. I love it. But I'm just saying, good journalism is everywhere. But great people are found in all great places. I forgot the point of my story. Hopefully it comes out better in the
Well, it's tough though. Like it's, because it's that's just kind of, you say it, but like today you Google and go, I need information. So let's like think of something today. We had, you have the hurricane that's coming.
Yeah.
Well, TV's writing about it. Axios Charlotte's writing about it. The Charlotte Ledger's writing about it. All these places are writing about it. And the Charlotte Observer's writing about it.
And those are the legitimate media news outlets. There are blogs. There are there are parents on Facebook. There are people on Reddit.
Yeah. But it's at the same time, I think that there's still a level. So it's kind of a dick thing to say, yeah. But at the same time, when it goes back to Ryan's point, like it's about institutions. That's kind of the thing with the institution, and it seems kind of dickish and it seems wrong. But when you're the Boston Globe, you can kind of whip it out and go, I'm the Boston Globe. That's why that's just what it is. It's the same thing anywhere.
Again, it's like whatever he can say to get the information.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think
maybe he doesn't even believe that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and maybe he doesn't. Yeah, you're right.
And because he's always kind of playing him because he's like, I need to get this. I need to get the information from you. But at the same time, I think you can do that. Despite all of what we deal with on a daily basis, I think there is a degree of you can whip it out and be like, well, this is the Charlotte Observer. This ain't Axios.
Yeah. I certainly agree with that. And let's be clear, I have said that before. I'm like, hey, this is the Observer. That said, I don't think that's necessarily fair. But whatever. There was another point that is escaping me right now along the same topic, but I cannot recall.
I think it's interesting what you said, Zach, with like it being about echoing Ryan about it being about institutions. Like I think I hadn't thought about it in that way, but that moment being in this particular movie, I think is really interesting, given that like he might recognize that like, yeah, the story was already written. It's not fair. It's not, or whatever. It's not really fair for me to just sort of leverage the power of my institution right now to do this, but I'm going to. And that's kind of what the movie's about.
But people, the reason why people are going to Robbie at a bar and kind of flexing on him and going like, hey, it's us, and going and having, calling meetings at his old high school and bringing lawyers and alumni there to kind of push. That's because it's the Boston Globe.
Right.
You're not going to get that with the Phoenix. And so
Julie, sorry.
Oh, I'm just agreeing.
Oh.
I do think that it's maybe not fair, but I think it's entirely the reality
Yeah.
and fair to reflect. I mean, I've very much run into that where there's been a version of a story that I'm trying to chase that gets reported in a smaller paper, and sources have said that same thing. And I have to make the case of just, well, I understand that you've talked about this and that there is a story, but I think that we can do more here, you know, and have a more of an impact. And while I totally get what you're saying, I think that that's the core of what he's saying is, well, no, I didn't see the paper and I didn't see the story in the Phoenix. It's his job to know the news, right?
Right.
So how many people that are going to church, they're sending their kids to care,
Which,
haven't seen it.
yeah.
And I think that's the point of that.
And it's a legitimate point. When the snap leader goes to Sasha in the bar and the guy goes, it's been 6 weeks since 9/11. Where's the story? We've been waiting on this, dude. This is going to change lives. It's going to save lives. How many lives are you willing to whatever? And she goes, I just need time. And he's like, do whatever you want. We're hostage to you anyway. No, seriously.
Yeah.
We're hostage to the biggest newspaper, the biggest news source in Boston, the most influential news source in Boston. I can plead with you all you want. You can do whatever you want because you guys have the influence. You guys have the impact. Yeah. And like, I that was something that I found interesting because while I was at the Herald, Winthrop, the local college in Rock Hill, South Carolina, they had this huge story about how two athletes had accused a certain person in the Winthrop athletic department of sexual assault, and it was this big deal. The Winthrop newspaper wrote about it. What did the Rock Hill Herald do? We did a whole investigation over a year. It was a wonderful series of investigation where we got cooperation from people. We really did our due diligence and stuff. But those sources would come up to us and say, hey, when's the story going to run? Mm-hmm. How many people, they wouldn't be aggressive about it, but they would be like, hey, I'm just saying he's still on staff.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you could understand if they were aggressive.
Yeah, and I could.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, and I felt that. But also I don't, because we had 5 people at the Rock Hill Herald. How many people does the Boston Globe have?
Yeah.
I mean, you know what I'm saying? So there's a little difference to it. But I did feel that when he was just like, do whatever you want. You're going to do whatever you want anyway.
Well, we talked about that a little bit with the All the President's Men episode, because in All the President's Men, you have these sequences where Robert Redford and Dustin Hoffman's characters are just literally they have this list of addresses and names, and they're just going and knocking on doors. Mm-hmm. And they go and they do that, and when they come back, the editor makes a comment like, "You've been doing this for 2 weeks," and you're like, 2 weeks, so for 2 weeks, your whole job was just not. And that's the kind of thing. That's a little bit of what you deal with now is, this type of journalism is not impossible now. It's not impossible. You can do this level of journalism today. It's just much more difficult because, you don't have 300 other people in that room who are doing stuff also.
Oh yeah. This is what I wanted to ask is what's the closest thing that you guys have to a spotlight team? Or are you doing, I'm not even talking investigations where someone but a months long or years long thing.
Yeah, but we have an investigative reporter. Mm-hmm. And so it's him and an editor and a data reporter. Yeah. And so they're doing that.
He's really remarkable too.
Yeah. And you have, we just came out with the plane crash project, which is not necessarily this isn't like this, but it's still a year-long investigation that 2 reporters were putting all the work into. Mm-hmm. And so that's why I say it's possible. It's the difficulty is less with the skill. I think that there's journalists today who are as skilled.
No, I'm just talking about the resources to throw.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But it's just if we have this investigative piece that Alex is going to work on, well then he doesn't have 10 reporters who are going to cover his work to a degree.
Yeah.
It's going to be we're just going to be, we're going to have an arm behind our back for a while to let him do it.
Well, and it's not the only thing he's going to be working on.
Yeah.
Either.
Well, I don't want to speak for Julia, but Julia's asked to do a follow-up story on this huge story, and she has to go all in on it. And then your deadline was 2 days?
Well, we pushed it.
Okay, but like
We amended that.
yeah,
to be
yeah.
honest
Can you
with
do a deep dive on this? Can you have it ready in 48 hours? That's just a different world.
We also amended the deep dive. I don't know if he talked to you about that.
As of
Okay,
today.
well,
Yeah.
all right. Well, you can scrap that point, I
No,
guess.
it's
But like,
But no, it's true.
It's a
It's
fair
true.
point,
Yeah, there's
though,
stuff-
because it was something where there's a case in Charlotte from 2000 where a 9-year-old went missing, and there's new evidence that came up in 2024, and so everyone in the room wanted to do a deep dive on it, but there were like other stories that I was wrapping up, and another story that took months to complete was about to publish when this news came up. And it just simply was not possible to do a deep dive, quote unquote, into this topic.
Yeah.
But we know that we have to just have different approaches to it, break things up smaller, that sort of thing.
Well, that's the other thing about the line in the movie about the URLs is predicting the whole world where you don't have the resources. Like no one's reading this paper at the kitchen table, like Alex is saying, and it's a 24/7 thing. It's totally different.
True.
very sad in my opinion. But I guess it was inevitable.
It is what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just is. You just adapt.
Yeah.
Alex, do you want to talk a little bit about why you screamed about editors after watching this movie?
Yeah. Just real quick. I love you, Lydia. You're great. You
I
are.
don't think Lydia's watching this.
You are. Well, like I will say, like I was screaming at the idea of editors as opposed to editors I actually work with, and that's not even like a PR statement. Like I think that
Alex loves his job. Please let him keep his job.
no, but like particularly my editor is fantastic at this. At like when I bounce ideas off of her, she is very much like, oh, that's good. Oh, I don't agree with that. Oh, you should talk to these people. She's like very quick about, oh, you should look into these documents. You should do this, whatever. She's like, and she comes up with her own story ideas too that I have literally benefited from. And she's like served me up on a platter, and I've been like, oh, all I have to do is talk to these people that you've already set shit up with, and I got it right. And like, she's fantastic. The thing that drives me nuts about this movie, and I think kind of captures it well, is these reporters are working their tails off, and they are going and they're knocking on doors and blah, blah, blah. And then the editor who is above them makes more money than them, probably has better hours than them, probably has a healthier home life with them. Although the guy from Sex and the City with the white hair, what's his name?
John Slatter.
John Slatter, yeah, that guy.
You could have said Mad Men, but yeah.
No, that was perfect.
He might not. He kind of seems upset all the time, so I don't know how his home life is.
But his
But
job is just like be annoyed at everyone.
but his job is be annoyed at everyone, ask questions that the reporters have already answered 5 different times, and then be like, "All right, keep going." And I'm just like, bro, if I have to hear a keep going, I can't, dude. I can't.
But the movie shows you like the two, because I'll just say, not to validate my own position, but editors are important. You
They
have
are.
to have
They're
editors.
wildly important.
But it also shows you the two sides of it, because you have the one side. That story wouldn't have been as impactful if you didn't have Marty Baron going. We can't if you could have just went with the story 6 weeks before, but we waited and we went after the system instead of just going after cardinal law. But then you have the negative side of it, which is Michael Keaton going like, yeah, we had this story. What was it, like
5 years ago?
6 years ago, and we buried it in Metro.
Right.
And so you see both sides where, and that's also like that also gets back to the institution thing, because it just shows the power of the globe. Because you could have solved this issue possibly 6 years ago, but you buried it in Metro because you didn't have somebody like Marty Baron going like, no, keep pushing on it.
Yep.
And it's not like he offers too much. Liev Schreiber's so good in that role.
Yep.
Because he's very understated, and whenever he doesn't show up a lot, but when he shows up, he's like batting 1,000.
Yep.
Because he's like, it's always just, you do it like, keep going. Like that sounds good. Keep going.
3 scenes where he plays just a total schmuck and wears glasses, and it's just like, yeah, you guys don't have it yet.
Yeah, but it
That's
shows
the whole role.
it shows the two sides of it, because like they fucked up 6 years ago and buried the story, and that was wrong.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's kind of like what he says, like that's history, and we can sit here and cry over spilt milk, or we can go home
take the weekend, come in Monday, do your job.
Well, they have those debates within the team too, because you have the Mark Ruffalo famous kind of movie star speech, and then it's literally just Michael Keaton is like, "Are you done? Like, let's get back to work." Like he's telling them, "We have it. Let's go to press with this," and they're saying, "We don't have it yet."
Yeah.
So all these debates that I'm sure y'all have all the time.
Oh yeah. Oh, there is nothing that pisses us, at least me. There's nothing that pisses us off more than we work so hard. It's like, hey, did you reach out to this person? Said, no, I didn't. And guess what? We're running it anyway. Okay. And then they're like, Alex, you need a second? I'm like, yeah. My bad. I don't actually yell, but like I get like there's some anger that comes up in me, and I'm just like, no, I didn't. I'll reach out right now. Yeah. You know what I'm saying?
You don't have a moment where you're like, they knew.
Yeah, I don't do that.
You're like,
don't do that.
You're like on Slack, like they knew. They were kids. They were priests.
Hey, can we hop on a call real quick?
Yeah. Can we get on like Google Meet and let me just like Mark Ruffalo you real quick? Yeah.
Just a reminder that they actually did know before the fact.
Yeah, sending emojis in the Slack, like trying to.
Oh yeah. I'm a king of the soft smile. The soft smile emoji. I always, when I'm really fired up, I'm like, all right, make sure to send a soft smile emoji. Make sure to do.
You said it at the beginning that you wanted to be in a environment like the Boston Globe where you have that newsroom. And it's never going to be like that again, just because you're not going to have as many people employed, but you're also not going to have like that type of space.
Also, people don't want to be in an office.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. Yeah. Like, how do you feel unfulfilled to a degree just because you don't have that experience of like being able to? You have that great scene at the beginning where Mark Ruffalo walks over and he's just like he's like, what's going on? And he's just like, I'm working. Fuck off, Mike.
Yeah.
Where you don't have that experience.
Oh,
for me, I mean, yeah. For me, absolutely, 1,000,000,000%. I cannot stress to you enough the nostalgia that I feel for a time that I didn't live in time in journalism.
Yeah.
I'm not even joking, I cannot describe to you how badly I want to be in the newsroom. I get it. There are a lot of terrible things in the 90s, in the early 2000s. People lost a lot of jobs in journalism. We didn't know how to use the internet, whatever. The internet was a very powerful tool that we should have been able to harness, whatever. I would have given anything to be in that newsroom from like 5 a.m. to 8 p.m. And then when the deadline hits, all I can do is be like, well, I tried my best, and I go get a beer with my friends, and all I have to worry about is if my competitor got something better than me in the newspaper the next day. And I get to hang out with like-minded people, get to hang out with veterans who have been in my position before, and I get to learn from them. Like, I got that to a certain extent at the Herald because I sat next to my desk buddy was this guy named Andrew Dice, and he is like the caricature of a journalist, got these like dark broad-rimmed glasses, smokes like a chimney. But like while I was at the Herald, I never saw him eat. I only saw him drink
He showed
coffee.
up in a tie yesterday, and I was like, Andrew, what are we doing?
Yes, his tie. He literally looks like them, doesn't he?
He looks like
And the first time I met him, I was interviewing for the job. Everyone was like, oh, Alex, so nice to meet you, blah, blah, blah. And Andrew goes, hey, nice to meet you. Oh, getting a call. It's Your Honor. And he's just like talking with a judge or some shit. And I'm just like, wow, this is who I want to be. This is who I've always thought I was going to be. And like, you lose that. Yeah. And when I'm struggling, like literally on my bed to write a 1,000-word story today about Andy Dalton, the quarterback for the Carolina Panthers. And I'm just like grinding away. I'm just like, man, it would be so nice if I had to be at my desk. If someone had to be like, hey, Alex, what are you working on? I'm working on the quarterback. Oh man, is he going to be good this year? Whatever it may be.
You need dicking around time.
Well,
that's what a newsroom is. Like
it's what it really is.
I worked in them. Like, yeah, there's like if it's an 8-hour day, 4 hours is actually doing work, if that. But usually 2 hours of doing actual work, and it's 6 hours of dicking around.
But it's not only, and I'm talking too much right now, but it's not only the newspaper people. It's also the sales team. It's also the mail people. It's also people who deliver the newspaper. Those are regular freaking people. The people who actually read the newspaper, who have kids in their Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools, who, like, we are like-minded, and I said how great that was. But it's also good to like talk to regular people and be like, hey, I'm going to write this story that's delicate about race. What do you think about this? And they can have an opinion. And like talking to regular people in your own building, in your own, that like represent the rest of your community was invaluable back then. We don't have that anymore. We don't have anything close to it anymore. And I think we're missing something in that. Not to get all depressing.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have the privilege of being able to like sit next to someone who's yelling on the phone to some, I don't know,
You're seeing how people work.
or police. Yeah, you don't have that, and so I think that's a lot of what we lose too.
Mm-hmm.
It's like instead of being like fired up about my job, being in the newsroom and hearing people do this, I watch Spotlight.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah,
You know,
it can become really like isolating, you know.
Yeah, it can.
There was this courts reporter in Savannah. His name was Jan Scutch, and he was the courts reporter there for 37 years. And he would get we still had like a classic Rolodex up to when he retired. He did classic, and he would just roll it and just be like, "Here's the last 8 district attorneys that he could just call and win." And he'd be on the call, and he'd be like, "No, listen, son, now, hear this." And then he would read back, and he'd be like, "I'm going to read back your quote. You tell me if it's wrong or not." And he would just sit there and read his story to them. He goes, "I get anything wrong? All right, then." Hang up the phone. But and then he would proceed to start yelling across the newsroom, and you're like, yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah.
You get personalities, and you also, I'm telling you, dicking around time. That's
That's how you learn.
Yeah, just like being on the phone too.
Yeah.
Like you just text people now, and you just you get left
Send
and right.
emails.
Yeah, send emails. Got to wait 6 hours.
And
Just work those phones, bro.
I'm a caller.
I call people.
I'm a caller.
But which honestly, I still get like phone anxiety. Like I've always been like, I don't know, it just makes me nervous to like call people or pick up phone calls.
Yeah.
And now it's my job.
Yeah.
Okay. But I want everybody to know I'm being really brave about it.
you are being so brave.
Thank you.
Round of applause for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't order my own takeout. I make my boyfriend do that at the end of the day. I'm like, I'm done.
Does anybody have any final thoughts? Anything that we didn't talk about that they want to mention for the film?
Yeah, I want to know. So I think Julia said she relates to Sasha a lot. Rachel McAdams' character. I want to know who y'all are. Obviously, Alex is Mark Ruffalo, but then who are y'all to?
I mean, I think I definitely relate to Sasha as well, just her being kind of the only like woman sort of at the center of the movie. It is something I noticed, like, I was thinking about like gender a lot while I was watching the movie, because I was like kind of watching like what scenes they had her in versus like what they had the men doing, and like
She's not really in those meetings with like slattery.
Right. She's handling a lot of the really like emotionally vulnerable conversations, and where she has to deal with a lot of like care and sort of sympathy and sort of be that kind of character. And like the only time she's ever in a meeting with someone where they have to be kind of like tough and like, well, you're going to give us what we need. She's like with a man in the room alongside her male coworker, So like I was thinking about some of those, scenes where they have a guy, one of the, male reporters, like really kind of like getting tough or whatever. And I'm like, well, they don't have her in that scene, which I
You
thought.
think that's like purposeful on the movie's part or on the actual reporter's part within like this story? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I think it's hard to say.
Because it would make sense if you're like, back then you say, let's send the woman to go do this sensitive thing.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I don't know how much of it is like just sort of the way, because I do think that like newsrooms have sexism in them, and certainly back then, definitely, so that might have been like a decision on the part of like her editor or whatever. But I also think it's something that like, honestly, I weigh some in when I'm reporting, is like, how am I able to be assertive and still be seen as like a warm person? Because I think it's something, not to get into my psychology background, but I'll go ahead and do it.
As she moves your Dr. Pepper.
I'm going to go ahead and move it. There's this study where they had people basically like rate like resumes of people for a particular job. And the only thing they manipulated was like the name of the person on the resume. So whether it was like Kenneth or Catherine, I think was like the name that they used or something like that. And they had them rate them in all kinds of different like areas. And the things, there was a correlation for men and for women when it came to competence and warmth. So with men, there was a direct correlation where like the more competent you were seen, the more warm you were seen as a human being.
Mhm.
Whereas women, there was an inverse correlation. So the more warm you were as a person, you were seen as less competent.
Wow.
Whereas the more competent you were seen, you're more like, oh, she's really good at her job, but I don't really like her very much.
Yeah. Wow.
You know? So I feel like that's something I'm conscious of when I'm like, especially like meeting new people all the time. Like I do sometimes feel like, okay, I need to convince them that I'm good at my job and I'm serious, but I also need them to like me. And sometimes that's something that feels difficult to navigate.
It's certainly something that I don't have to consider. I mean, when I'm out in the field, like literally Monday night, I just wrote, it's going to publish tomorrow. Y'all can read it on charlotteobserver.com. I go to a bar, a Cincinnati Bengals bar, and I do this because the Panthers are playing the Bengals on Sunday, and Andy Dalton, a very famous former Bengal, is now the quarterback of the Carolina Panthers. I'm talking to fans about, hey, how does it feel to see Andy Dalton play for the Carolina Panthers now and do so well, blah, blah. It's a fluffy thing, but it ended up being kind of funny and fun. I had no issue with people worrying about my competence. I show up to people and they see my dude look and they're like, okay, he probably knows football. You know what I'm saying? What I had to worry about was, okay, can I speak in a slow enough and a high enough pitch voice to where they don't find me intimidating, to where and like, if am I friendly enough to where, okay, yeah, I'll talk to this kid. Like, that's all I needed to worry about. I couldn't imagine, and I was already anxious enough for that. Couldn't imagine having to also be like, oh shit, I also have to prove that I actually know something about this.
It can be tough. Well, especially, it depends on the source, right? But like, especially I found with like older men, like I've had some of them call me like sweetheart during interviews. I had this one guy, there were two reporters. There was me and a male reporter there, and we were talking to this guy, and he had on like a sling, and his shoe was untied, and he was like, young lady, can you tie my shoe for me while I talk to this guy? And so he wanted me to like tie his shoe.
What'd you do?
I was like, and I didn't know what to say. I was like, well, I mean, I think I'd like to get everything that we can. And then if you still need help, I can try to help you with that. You know, I didn't know what to say because I was just like, you know, I don't know. I didn't, know how to respond. But I remember in the moment, I was like, why didn't you ask like Justin to tie your shoe? Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, facts, any last things that I wanted to bring up? Rebecca, do you have any oh wait, was that was your final?
That was kind of my final.
Yeah.
We were talking about who we are. I, in short, think I'm Sasha.
That's right.
I'm Sasha's son. No.
I mean,
I can have two Sashas though. Like I want like Zach is Michael Keaton. I think obviously.
Oh, we got to cast
You're
each
obviously
other.
Mark.
I don't know if I'm.
Have to
She's
swap
definitely more
genders,
Sasha than I am, though. So you got Sasha for sure.
All right, you'll be fourth guy.
Bro, I don't even think I'm.
The fourth dude with the kids. I don't know that guy.
Yeah, the
Okay.
Predator priest. Yeah, lives next to the Predator.
Yeah, but like Mark Ruffalo, I guess is who I aspire to be. I really love eccentric.
Yeah, can we talk about Mark Ruffalo?
Go for it, dog. The floor is yours.
He's so amazing in this movie. He's
Yeah.
so good.
Yeah, he is.
I think everything he does in this movie is amazing. We were laughing at him, but in the best. Like I think he honestly is bringing some much needed levity to like the first half of the movie, especially.
Oh, yeah.
He's so funny. Like we laughed at him just walking across the street. He's so good.
Dodging traffic.
Yeah, he's the greatest.
Yeah.
It's interesting because he's very good. He's also doing the most out of the cast.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that's why like Rachel McAdams is so good because she's just like she's very contained and in her scenes like she's not like Ruffalo is allowed to kind of be more flowery and more like bombastic.
Yeah.
And she has to be much more contained. It's the same with like Keaton. Michael Keaton's so good in this movie because he gets to have the scenes where he's just like, I need this information, and gets to be a little bit more, push a little bit more on the sources, but also he's a bit of like the good old boy.
Yeah.
And that's all. And so he's
kind of playing Michael Keaton. He's kind of doing a version of Michael Keaton.
Yeah. And so he's having to do where, because he's having to push on, like, I don't know what happens with him and his friend who's the lawyer, but that's probably a fractured relationship if there even is one at this point, because it's it's kind of one of those where it's tough because it's like that's what we talked earlier about, the job bleeding over into your regular life. It's like that's a guy I would play golf with. I wouldn't really probably flex on too much for like information for stories, and now you have to do it to the point where it's like, I'm probably going to ruin this relationship. And he does it in a way that just feels very, it's also like somewhat contained in, like everybody is very contained outside of Ruffalo, which is fine because that's what the role allows him to do.
Yeah.
Even like Stanley Tucci a little bit is like very like, he gets to kind of like be a little bit more he gets to be a little bit more than everybody else.
Yeah. I love the scene too with Michael Keaton's other buddy or other guy from the school where he went to. And he's at the bar and he's leaning on him. Mm-hmm. And he says, he's a great line where he's just like, this is how it happens. Like one guy leans on a guy and then a whole city turns its back.
Yeah.
And then he's still leaning on him and then Michael Keaton just hears him out and then he goes, so when we run the story, and he just gives him that.
Well, I just think about it because like, one, I've known editors who are really ingrained in the community and have that stuff happen where I've like been with them and it's like, they've known this guy forever, but they're also leaning on them for a story. Yeah. And it just makes me kind of think of like, it's tough. Like to me, like if I was Michael Keaton in that moment, I would lean on him because I like at the end of the day, I'd be like, this story's more important. Right. But it'd be tough, because you can't go back to him and be like, hey, I'm sorry about that. It's like, no, it's bridge is burned.
It's done. Yeah, it's done. I mean, we've been talking this entire time properly and deservedly about how institutions work together, but who gets shit done in this movie? It's the eccentric Garabedian who's an outsider. It is the head editor of the Boston Globe they bring up his Jewish roots several times in a very Catholic city. Mm-hmm. The outside, it's Sasha who actually gets the interview with the person who is the only woman on the spotlight team. It's like
Mark Ruffalo, who is from Boston but doesn't have an accent and doesn't give a fuck about this. He's just like, whatever.
Those are the people who get stuff done. One of my favorite quotes that my mom ever said was, or like she didn't make this up. My mom's a remarkable person. She said, the reasonable person adapts to the world around them. The unreasonable person expects the world to adapt to them. That's why all meaningful change happens via the unreasonable person. And I think that's exemplified in this film, in journalism, in the world. I mean, like I feel like I'm an agreeable person, and honestly, I think that comes at sometimes to a detriment of my job. Like my beat partner is this guy who doesn't mind pissing people off, and it doesn't mind it, and I like am kind of envious of that. And so, like, that's something I'm working on. But, like, the world doesn't change without the people who are disagreeable. I guess that's my point.
Julia, any final thought?
I thought that they did a really good job, too, of displaying, of course, the different characters within the newsroom, but also the different victims who are characters and what that meant for them, because it's introduced as, well, like these are the good ones, they're still alive. And then they mention that there's drug use and there's all of these different facets.
They have this shot of the guy's track marks.
And that guy is so good. He looks like he doesn't feel like an actor. He feels like they pulled him off the street.
Yeah, he's a talent for sure.
Yeah.
And they're all distinct. The gay guy too. Like all these distinct. You remember a lot of the faces and a lot of.
And I think all those characters are very like, they feel very real too and like genuine. Like they don't overdo it, whereas I feel like with characters like that, if they're supposed to be kind of a sympathetic character, it's easy to kind of go too far in one direction and really overdo it. But we talked about the victim that Sasha talked to at the like cafe. Like that felt very believable to me. That felt very real. Even just like her grandma, like they didn't show her grandma like cry over the newspaper. They just showed her kind of look a little bit visibly uncomfortable and like ask her to go get her a water, So.
100%. Zach, do you have any final thoughts?
No. Kat, do you have anything you want to say?
Kat, what's up? Our studio audience.
This was awesome.
Thumbs up or thumbs down?
Hi.
Just Ebert style.
This is my first time watching the movie.
and I really enjoyed it. I really like watching the dig and seeing all the parts come to fruition at the end of the story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who made the best points around the table?
The only great points, I loved hearing all the journalism talk. Not a journalist, but it was good insight.
It was very diplomatic. That was good.
Yeah.
But Kat is a loyal subscriber to the Charlotte Observer, and we need more people like her.
And
So-
You
could
too
be
can get access.
So literally, okay, I hate to do this. 99 cents a month for 4 months. What are we talking about here? Come on, guys.
Use code Zetlo for 50%.
Come on, y'all.
No, hey,
How much is
just
your Netflix subscription?
just hit me on Twitter if you need the code, bro. Just hit me on Twitter. All right. Anyway.
All right. Well, that's going to wrap up this episode of Cinematary. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram at handle Cinematary, at Cinematary. You can also find us on Letterboxd at letterboxd.com/Cinematary, where we list all the movies that we talked about in this episode. If you would like to support Cinematary on top of supporting the Charlotte Observer, you can go to patreon.com/Cinematary. You can give us $1, you can give us $5, you can give us $20,000. It's kind of up to you. Big thanks to our patrons. Let me see if I can remember them off the top of my head. Cam, Tanner Huskins, Ron Hayes, Teresa Marsati, and Tyler Chandler. Thank you so much for supporting the show.
Oh, yeah.
We're going to be, this is a wrap on the journalism and film series, but we are going to be back with a 4-part series looking at films by M. Night Shyamalan. We're going to be kicking it off with 1998. Sixth Sense? 99, yeah. But we're going to start with The Sixth Sense. So join us in a couple weeks. We're going to be seeing dead people. But thank you for watching and listening, and thank you everybody for doing the podcast.
Nah, thanks for having us on.
Thanks for having us.